He came to fire the single mother cleaner, but her daughter's wisdom cleaned the dust from his own heart instead. What happens when a man who has everything is forced to confront a single mother who has nothing but her dignity? Can a decision made in a sterile billion-naira penthouse survive the innocent gaze of a child? And when a heart ruled by spreadsheets meets a spirit refined by struggle, could the most unexpected calculation of all be love? Friends, please kindly like and subscribe if you enjoy this story. Step into a world of modern Nigerian luxury, where a single moment of connection threatens to dismantle a billionaire's carefully ordered life and rewrite its future entirely. The data was an indisputable cold splash of red on the dashboard of Chi Jayok CJ Jaidiafor's tablet. Each scarlet entry represented a failure, a lapse in the meticulously engineered ecosystem of his company, Zeno Technologies. From his penthouse office, a sanctuary of minimalist Nigerian opulence, he oversaw it all. The walls, clad in polished African sky granite, reflected the Lagos sun, while a massive, textured canvas by contemporary artist P.E.Ju Alatize, a swirl of deep indigo and gold leaf, dominated one wall, a silent testament to controlled chaos. His own desk, a monolithic slab of aged Irako wood, was clear of everything but the tablet and a single sleek monitor. Order, precision. These were the pillars of his empire. A soft chime announced his head of facilities, Mr. Adebayo, whose broad frame, draped in a fine, cream-colored agbada, seemed to carry the weight of an unpleasant task. "Sir," Adebayo began, his voice a low, respectful rumble. "The quarterly performance review for non-contract staff. There is an outlier." CJ didn't look up. Define outlier. The cleaner for the executive wing on 15. Mrs. Neka Ease. Punctuality has dropped 17% this month. The system has logged 3 late arrivals and 1 early departure outside of approved parameters. Adebayo placed a physical printout on the Irako desk, a gesture that felt archaic and therefore doubly significant. The reason cited in the log is domestic issues. CJ finally lifted his gaze. His eyes were the color of dark roast coffee, and just as intense. Domestic issues are not a corporate concern, Adebayo. They are a personal liability. We have a creche policy for a reason. She is a probationary staff, sir. Not yet eligible for the creche. A single mother, I am told. The phrase single mother landed in the sterile air between them, not as a point of empathy, but as a variable in a human resources equation. It was a known risk factor. CJ steepled his fingers. Sentiment is a poor foundation for a balance sheet. If she cannot adhere to the basic structure of her role, she becomes a liability. You know the procedure. Adebayo shifted his weight. I do, sir. However, given that it's the executive floor, I thought a personal touch from leadership might soften the transition. It is sometimes prudent. CJ considered this. Head recently read a Harvard Business Review article on empathetic leadership and its positive impact on remaining staff morale during downsizing. A personal touch, however performative, was a strategic tool. Prudence is not the same as sentiment, Adebayo. You are correct. CJ stood, smoothing the invisible wrinkles from his tailored, navy blue suit. I'll speak to her myself. A lesson in leadership for us both. He dismissed Adebayo and took a private elevator down to the 15th floor. The corridor was silent, its floors a seamless, polished terrazzo streaked with gray and gold, reflecting the ambient glow from geometric, bronze wall sconces. It was a space designed to impress and intimidate, and it usually did. But as he turned the corner towards the janitorial closet, the silence was broken. It wasn't the sound of a vacuum cleaner or the clatter of supplies. It was a voice, small, clear, and utterly confident, threading its way through the hushed atmosphere. The eagle does not hunt flies, the little voice recited, with the solemn gravity of a seasoned orator. So why does the chicken fret in the yard? The sky is different. CJ stopped, his Italian leather shoes silent on the stone. He peered into the slightly ajar door of the supply closet. Inside, a woman in a standard-issue blue cleaner's uniform had her back to him, vigorously polishing a stack of glass shelves. and perched on an upturned plastic bucket, a little girl sat. She couldn't have been more than 5, her hair intricately plaited with blue and gold beads that clicked softly as she moved. She held a well-worn picture book, but she wasn't reading from it. She was declaiming from memory. The woman, Mrs. Ease, turned, her arm stilling mid-motion. The moment she saw him, her entire body froze. The polish-soaked cloth dripped onto the floor. "Olga, sir. Good afternoon." Her voice was a frantic whisper. "I can explain. My daughter, Kemi, her school. There was no one. I promise it will not happen again." CJ held up a hand, his gaze locked on the little girl. She had looked up, her large, luminous eyes taking him in without a trace of the fear that gripped her mother. She assessed his suit, his posture, his watch. "You are the big Olga from the sky," she stated, her head tilted. A muscle in CJ's jaw twitched. He was the big Olga from the penthouse, the one whose name was whispered with a mixture of awe and apprehension. He crouched down, bringing himself to her eye level, the fine wool of his trousers pressing against the damp floor. "The sky?" She pointed a small finger upwards. "Mummy says the bosses work in the sky, and we work on the ground." Her eyes dropped to his wrist. "Your watch is very big. Does it tell you when it's time to be happy?" The question was so absurd, so utterly disconnected from the purpose of his Patek Philippe, that a short, surprised laugh escaped him. "It tells me the time for meetings," he said, his voice strangely gentle. "Oh," Kemi said, a flicker of pity in her eyes. "Mummy's watch has a butterfly. It's better for happy times." He looked from this precocious child, sitting on a bucket in a closet, to her mortified mother. He saw the shame in Neka's eyes, but also a fierce, protective love. He saw the gleaming shelves, the spotless floor. The data on his tablet was correct. She had been late, but the data had failed to capture the entire story. It hadn't quantified the dignity in Neka's work, or the profound wisdom in her daughter's innocent questions. The script of termination he had carried down from his granite and Irako with sanctuary suddenly felt flimsy and worthless. The HBR article on empathetic leadership seemed laughably academic. This was something else. This was a variable his algorithms had never accounted for. The big Olga from the sky was, for the first time in a very long time, utterly and completely grounded. The silence in the janitorial closet stretched, thick and heavy with unspoken consequences. CJ remained crouched, his knees beginning to protest, held in position by the gravitational pull of Kemi's innocent question. "Does it tell you when it's time to be happy?" The query echoed in the sterile chamber of his mind, a place where time was partitioned into productive blocks, not emotional states. He looked at Neka Ease properly for the first time. Not as a failing employee, a line item on a report, but as a person. The panic in her eyes was being wrestled into a mask of stoic resignation. She was preparing for the blow, her shoulders squaring, her chin lifting just a fraction. It was the posture of someone who had weathered storms before. Her uniform, though simple, was immaculate. The floor around her a mirror finish. The data was wrong, incomplete. It measured punctuality but not diligence. It logged time but not dedication. "Mummy says being on time is a promise," Kemi continued, filling the silence with her tiny, authoritative voice. "But Auntie Taupe, who watches me, traveled to the village. The village doesn't have a big clock like you." CJ's gaze shifted from the mother to the daughter, then back. The corporate script, the one about policies, expectations, and difficult but necessary decisions, turned to ash on his tongue. Firing her wasn't just a business decision. It was an act of profound cruelty, one that would shatter the delicate stability this little girl on the bucket enjoyed. He thought of the Alatais painting in his office, the controlled chaos of indigo and gold. This was chaos of a different kind, human and messy, and his usual tools of control were useless. He rose to his feet, the movement slow, deliberate. Neka flinched, almost imperceptibly. "Mrs. Ease," he began, his voice lower, softer than he used in any boardroom. "Bringing a child to the executive floors is a clear breach of security and conduct policy." Neka's eyes fell to the floor. "I know, sir. I am so sorry, it will not." He held up a hand again, not to silence her, but to pause her apology. However, he interjected, the word hanging in the air. Xenotechnologies prides itself on innovation, on finding solutions where others see problems. He was thinking on his feet, constructing a new narrative, a different kind of deal. We have been planning a pilot program for an on-site creche, a test run. We need a beta user, so to speak, a staff member with a child to help us assess the viability. Neka's head snapped up, her eyes wide with confusion and a dawning, hesitant hope. She looked like she was trying to solve a complex puzzle. Creche, sir? But I am not. My level. It's a pilot program, Mrs. Ease. Eligibility criteria are still being defined, he said, the corporate jargon feeling clunky but necessary as a framework for his unprecedented act of mercy. Would you and Kemi be willing to participate? It would mean she has a proper place to be, and you can maintain your schedule. Tears, which she had been bravely holding back, now spilled over. She wiped them hastily with the back of her hand, leaving a small smudge of polish on her cheek. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. God bless you, sir. Her gratitude was so raw, so profound, it was almost physical in the small space. Kemi, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, clapped her hands. A new school? Here? Will it have books about kites? CJ found himself smiling, a genuine, uncalculated smile that felt strange on his face. I will make sure it does. He turned and walked out of the closet, his mind whirring not with spreadsheets, but with logistics. He needed to call HR. He needed to find a room. He needed to buy books about kites. Back in his penthouse office, the panoramic view of Lagos seemed different. The city wasn't just a network of assets and opportunities. It was a living, breathing entity full of people like Neka and Kemi, struggling, surviving, reciting poetry on upturned buckets. He picked up his tablet and opened the performance report for Mrs. Neka Ease. With a few swift taps, he changed her status from under review to active. Then he created a new file, Project Promise, On-Site Creche Initiative. He had built his fortune on spotting potential where others saw none. Today, he had seen a different kind of potential, not in a market or a technology, but in a mother's determination and a child's wisdom. The cost of the creche was a negligible line item. The return on investment, however, was a variable he couldn't yet calculate, but for the first time, the mystery of it felt more intriguing than unsettling. The big Oga from the sky had just authorized a project that made no financial sense, and the feeling it left him with was suspiciously, undeniably, close to what Kemi might call a happy time. The following week in CJ's life was governed by a new and peculiar rhythm, one that ran counter to the metronomic tick of his Patek Philippe. The sterile silence of his penthouse office was now frequently broken by the rustle of architectural plans and the soft chime of video calls with interior designers specializing in child-friendly spaces. The Project Promise file on his tablet, once a single page, had swollen into a detailed proposal, complete with budget allocations and safety compliance checks. He found himself descending to the 15th floor not as an inspecting CEO, but as a project manager in uncharted territory. He had commandeered a small, sunlit office with large windows overlooking a less corporate part of Lagos, a view of rusted corrugated roofs and the vibrant, tangled energy of a street market. It was a view full of life, a stark contrast to his own curated skyline. The room was a blank canvas, and CJ, a man who delegated everything, found himself personally involved. He rejected the first set of proposed furniture, garish primary-colored plastic, as an eyesore. Instead, he approved samples for miniature, ergonomic chairs upholstered in soft, mudcloth fabric and low tables made of light, sustainable Irako. He insisted on sound-absorbing wall panels, not for quiet, but to keep Kemi's recitations from echoing into the executive corridors. On one wall, a local muralist was commissioned to paint a sprawling, whimsical scene of the Lagos skyline, complete with a bright yellow kite dancing among the skyscrapers. His site visits to check on the progress became a ritual. He would stride in, his suit a dark slash against the burgeoning color, and Kemi, who was often there with her mother after school, would immediately accost him. Big Oga, the painter gave the kite a friend today. she would announce, pulling him by the hand to point out a new, smaller blue kite added to the mural. Strategic alliance, CJ would murmur, a smile playing on his lips. A very smart move. It was during these visits that he began to truly see Nneka, not just as a cleaner or a single mother, but as a woman. He noticed the quiet efficiency with which Shed helped the workers move a box, her thoughtful suggestions on where to place the book cubbies for the best light. One afternoon, he found her on a ladder, expertly untangling a string of faulty fairy lights the electrician had given up on. "You have a knack for this," he remarked, steadying the ladder from below. She glanced down, a faint smile touching her lips. "When you have little, you learn to fix what you have, sir." Her voice had lost its tremor of fear. It was calm, melodic, and held a quiet intelligence that intrigued him. He began to linger after his inspections, inventing questions about the creche's operational needs just to hear her opinions. One evening, as the setting sun painted the new mural in hues of orange and gold, they were the last three in the room. Kemi was asleep on a pile of plush cushions, a book about elephants open on her chest. CJ and Nneka stood by the window, watching the street below begin to glitter with evening lights. "It is kind what you are doing," Nneka said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. "Not many would do this." CJ kept his gaze on the horizon. Zeno believes in investing in its people. The corporate line felt hollow even to him. Nneka shook her head gently. "This is not a Zeno decision. This is a you decision. I see the way you look at her." She nodded towards her sleeping daughter. "You see a person, not a problem." Her perception unnerved him. She saw through the big Oga persona to the man who was, for the first time, questioning his own foundations. He had built an empire on ruthless efficiency, yet this single act of inefficiency, this diversion of time and resources for a cleaner and her child, felt more significant than any acquisition Head made that year. Her poem, CJ found himself saying, the words surprising him. About the kite. She said it will never die. Nneka smiled, a true, warm smile that transformed her face. Hope is a stubborn thing in this city. It finds a way to fly even when the strings are heavy. In that moment, surrounded by the scent of new paint and children's books, Chi Jayok Jidiofor felt a tectonic shift within himself. The blueprint he had drafted for his life, power, wealth, a suitable society-approved marriage, suddenly seemed as flimsy as the primary colored plastic Head rejected. The return on investment for Project Promise was no longer a mystery variable. It was taking shape before him in the quiet strength of a woman who fixed fairy lights and the peaceful sleep of a child who believed kites were immortal. He wasn't just building a creche, he was, for the first time, building a connection. And the feeling was more profitable than any quarter's earnings report. The official opening of the Promise Creche was a small corporate affair. A photographer from the internal communications team snapped pictures of CJ cutting a ribbon, a rare, slightly awkward smile on his face as Kemi, now the creche's first and most enthusiastic pupil, held the other end of the ribbon with solemn importance. A press release was drafted, touting Zeno Technologies' commitment to employee welfare. The problem, from a business standpoint, had been elegantly solved. But for CJ, a new, more complex problem had just begun. The silence of his Ikoyi mansion, a space he had always equated with peace and the reward of his success, now felt profound, oppressive. The terrazzo floors, usually gleaming under the light of his calabash fixtures, seemed only to reflect the emptiness. The bold, abstract art on the walls spoke a language of aesthetic triumph that suddenly felt meaningless. He would sit in his vast living room, the only sound the whisper of the air conditioning, and his mind would wander to the sound of Kemi's laughter echoing off the creche's soundproofed walls, or the calm, melodic tone of Nneka's voice. He found himself inventing reasons to go to the 15th floor. A spot check on the creche's integration. A review of the cleaning standards now that the space was active. It was during one of these flimsy pretexts, a week after the opening, that he found Nneka alone, arranging a new shipment of books. Kemi was in the adjacent nap room, finally asleep after a spirited session of kite drawing. "The new stock has arrived. I see," CJ said, his voice echoing a little too loudly in the quiet room. Nneka turned, not startled, but with a quiet acknowledgement that had become their new normal. Yes, sir. The books about elephants and kites are her favorites. She slid a volume onto a shelf. She talks about them all the way home. Home. The word hung in the air. CJ pictured a small, cramped apartment, probably in a bustling, nondescript part of town. He imagined Kemi chattering at a small table, the walls thin, the world outside loud and chaotic. The contrast with his own silent, sprawling fortress was jarring. An idea, as unprecedented as his decision not to fire her, bloomed in his mind. It was impulsive, ill-advised, and broke every rule of professional distance he had ever lived by. Yet it felt as inevitable as his next breath. Mrs. Ease. Nneka, he began, correcting himself, and the use of her first name sent a subtle charge through the space between them. I was wondering. The creche is a success, largely due to Kemi's beta testing. He clasped his hands behind his back, adopting a boardroom posture to deliver a deeply personal proposal. I'd like to thank her. I was thinking you both might join me for dinner at my home this Friday. Nneka's hands stilled on the books. She turned fully to face him, her expression unreadable. Shock, certainly, a flicker of suspicion, but beneath that a deep, curious wonder. Dinner? At your house, sir? The mansion can be a bit sterile for a child, he said, a wry note entering his voice. But I have a media room, with a very large screen for cartoons, and a chef who is, I'm told, exceptional, though he rarely gets to cook for anyone who appreciates more than grilled chicken and steamed vegetables. He was rambling. He Chi Jayok Jidiofor never rambled. Nneka studied him. She saw past the billionaire CEO, past the big Oga. She saw the man who had crouched on a dirty floor to speak to her daughter, the man who had insisted the muralist add a second kite. She saw not a predator, but a lonely man tentatively reaching out for a connection that no amount of money could buy. A slow, cautious smile touched her lips. Kemi would talk about nothing else for a month, she said softly. She would probably recite her poems for your chef. Then it's settled, CJ said, a wave of relief and something akin to excitement washing over him. I'll send a car for you. Friday at 7. He left the creche, his heart beating a strange, unprofessional rhythm. Back in his penthouse, he didn't look at his spreadsheets. Instead, he called his house manager. Friday night, he instructed, I'm having guests, a mother and her young daughter. I want the media room prepared. Stock it with, I don't know, what do children like? Animated films. And tell Chef Kwame he has free reign. I want something Nigerian, something memorable. As he hung up, he looked out at the city. The setting sun was painting the sky in brilliant, hopeful strokes, the same color as the kite in the creche's mural. For the first time in years, the walls of his gilded cage didn't feel like a sanctuary, but like a place that was waiting, empty, for life to finally burst in. The invitation had been extended. Now he could only wait and see if they would come. The car sent for Nneka and Kemi was a discreet, obsidian black SUV. Its plush interior so silent, it seemed to absorb the city's chaotic symphony. Kemi, wearing her best dress, a vibrant yellow with a pattern of little suns, pressed her face against the cool glass, her eyes wide as they navigated the guarded gates into the hushed, tree-lined streets of Ikoyi. Mummy, does the big Oga live in a castle? She whispered, her breath fogging the window. Nneka, smoothing the folds of her own simple but elegant navy blue dress, could only offer a nervous smile. Something like that, Omo me. When the SUV glided to a stop, the mansion rose before them, a breathtaking fusion of sharp modern lines and warm Nigerian textures. The entrance was flanked by two towering, sculpted Irako wood doors, intricately carved with geometric patterns that echoed the motifs in the terrazzo flooring. A staff member, dressed in crisp, neutral tones, greeted them with a quiet bow. Good evening, Mrs. Ease, Miss Kemi. Mr. Jidiofor is expecting you. The grand foyer stole the breath from Nneka's lungs. The ceiling soared, from which hung a breathtaking chandelier made of hundreds of hand-blown glass pieces, shaped like budding cocoa pods, casting 1,000 points of warm light. The air smelled of polished wood and faint, exotic flowers. CJ appeared from a wide archway, and the sight of him out of his corporate armor was a shock to NECA's system. He wore dark, tailored trousers and a simple, soft-looking linen shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He looked younger, more approachable, and the smile he gave Kemi was entirely genuine. "You came," he said, his voice warm. "We saw a fountain with lights," Kemi announced, bypassing all formalities. "Is there a pool?" CJ chuckled. "There is. But first, I'm told there are cartoons waiting in a room with a screen as big as this wall." He led them through the living area, and NECA tried not to gawk. The room was a masterpiece of modern Nigerian design. Low-slung, deep sofas in rich, indigo-dyed cotton, punctuated by throw pillows in bold, Ankara prints. A colossal, abstract painting in shades of earth and sunset dominated one wall, its texture so visceral she could almost feel it. The media room was a revelation. It was cozy, soundproofed, and featured a massive screen where a colorful animated film was paused. A vast basket of plush toys sat in one corner. "Chef Kwame has prepared a feast," CJ said to NECA as Kemi immediately dove for the toys. "But perhaps we could let the critic in there." He nodded towards the media room. "Eat first? My house manager can stay with her." It was a thoughtful gesture, one that acknowledged Kemi's needs and gave them a chance to talk. Soon, a small table was set up in the media room for Kemi with a plate of perfectly golden plantain, jollof rice, and tender chicken, and the film was resumed at a volume that allowed for conversation. In the dining room, a more intimate space than NECA had expected, a table of polished ebony was set for two. The food was a work of art. Smoky pepper soup, grilled prawns the size of her palm, and a main course of ofada rice with a rich, aromatic stew. "This is too much," NECA said, her voice barely a whisper as she took her seat. "It's just food," CJ said, pouring her a glass of sparkling water from a crystal carafe. "I realized I've never eaten a proper meal with someone who wasn't discussing quarterly projections." The conversation started tentatively. He asked about her childhood, her studies in accounting. She spoke of her village in Enugu, the smell of cassava roasting, her dream of working in a big bank in Lagos. Then she spoke of Michael, her late husband, a bright-eyed engineer, the accident that stole him, and the subsequent, brutal struggle to provide for Kemi alone. Her voice didn't break, but it was filled with a raw honesty that was more powerful than any tears. CJ, in turn, found himself speaking not of his successes, but of his own solitude, of growing up with relentless pressure to achieve, of parents who saw a legacy where he saw a life. He spoke of the emptiness that lingered in this beautiful house, a hollow victory. "I have everything you're supposed to want," he confessed, looking around the room. "But until Kemi asked me about my watch, I don't think I knew what happy time was." They talked for hours. The formality of Sir and Mrs. Ease melted away, leaving only Chi Jayok and NECA. He was captivated by the quiet fire in her eyes, the resilience in her spirit, the sharp, observant mind that life's hardships had not been able to dull. Later, as a drowsy Kemi was carried to the car, clutching a new, plush elephant, she looked at CJ. "Your house is big, big Oga, but it's nicer with people in it." Standing at his doorway, watching the taillights of the SUV disappear, Chi Jayok felt the truth of her words settle deep in his soul. The mansion was no longer just silent. It was waiting, and for the first time he knew exactly what, or who, he wanted to fill it with. The evening had not been a thank you dinner. It had been a beginning,